We have Anthony Kim and Larry Rosenstock to be leading this next session. So first, Anthony will give a few words about the blended learning model that he's been bringing to different schools and give some examples of the success or stories that he's been finding through that and what types of data that they've collected from what can happen in a school with a blended learning model. And then Larry will talk about his experiences at High Tech High with project-based learning. And then we'll have a time for some panel and questions afterwards. So Anthony.
Great, it's great to be here. I'm a little bit nervous to be speaking in front of you all about this topic, so excuse me if I stutter a little bit. What I thought I'd do was give you a couple. I wasn't given too much time here, so I thought I'd give you a couple short, couple-minute videos, giving you examples of what this might look like in some student reactions and teacher reactions, and I'm going to just quickly walk you through a few of them. And then I'm going to talk to you in a little bit at a higher level and talk to you about what the concepts are, and then give you some actual results that we're getting at an elementary school with KIPP LA. So the first school I'm going to play out here is Rocketship Education, and you might have heard of them. It was founded by John Danner, who is an internet executive, and Reed Hastings is involved. They're in San Jose, and what their innovation was, they have this concept called a lab rotation model, and within the lab, students go use adaptive content providers like Dreambox or Reasoning Mind or any of the other products out there. But at first glance, it might look like a normal school with a lab. But what happens behind the scenes and under the hood is really important, which is the data feedback loop that goes back to the teachers to inform them about classroom instruction. So I'm going to play this one real quick, if I could figure out how to do it. I can't. Oh.
John has developed a model where he can take some of the poorest, most difficult to educate kids in America, provide them with basic skills training through the use of technology, layer on top of that higher order thinking through some of the best teachers that we can find in our communities, and together get these kids to perform.
Great. So the next slide here, this video is about Mission Dolores Academy, and the backstory on them is they're two Catholic schools with about 150 kids each, and they were going to close because of the funding issues and such, and Catholic schools are just, across the country are hurting pretty bad. So Scott Hamilton, who started Seton Education Partners, actually came in with this new initiative to help leverage technology in the schools and increase enrollments. And so this is a little clip. It's opening this year, and so it's just a short clip about them. Oops, I did the wrong one. Oops. My eyesight is really, I can't even see where I'm clicking, so sorry. Oh, there you go.
Program is really about using computer technology, the very best computer technology, to help individualize the instruction for every child in the school.
Our focus as a school has been on results, improving student achievement, using data to drive instruction. And now with Phaedrus, we will be able to harness results in ways that we never could on our own.
One of the most exciting things about the Phaedrus program is that it's not only going to increase learning for students at the Mission Dolores Academy, but it's going to reduce the per pupil costs for operating the Mission Dolores Academy and set an amazing example, show what's possible in urban Catholic education for thousands of schools all over the country.
I want to either be a lawyer or a doctor when I grow up, and computers are really important for that. So this Phaedrus thing, it's going to be really awesome for me to succeed.
He also said that he wanted to, apply for the NBA draft, but I took that part out. This is,
We have 3 stations. Our first station is direct
I'll tell you about it afterwards.
Direct is where we face the teacher so he could physically teach us the lesson. The second station is independent, where students work together on a activity. And our third station is Ref Prep. It's an online software that we use to build up our algebra skills.
So this is a 9 through 12 high school in Los Angeles, right at the, I know it as the corner of the Bloods and the Crips, because that's where, you know, they hang out. And so they have about 30 kids in this school with a rotational model of 3 stations. One station is teacher guided, one station is peer-based group instruction, and one station is the computers. There's one-to-one computing at this school. And they're launching a full school like this this fall. And then finally, some of you may have heard about this one. It's called Carpe Diem in Yuma, Arizona. It's in rural Arizona, right at the border. And this guy, Rick Oxton, would have closed the school if he didn't go to this model because he just couldn't afford to keep it open. And what they found is after the first year of implementing the model, the gains were like 60% gains for student outcomes, and it's actually one of the top performing charter schools in Arizona right now. So just wanted to highlight this one, and it looks, it looks completely different than
educational
one of the normal
challenges were not
schools
a
you
lot
might see.
different than the entire state or many states in the United States. Students all across the country have been losing motivation to learn. What we became frustrated with is that the system of education that we had really was more system-centric than it was student-centric.
So what happens if you flip that model around? What happens if you design a school from the ground up around the student instead of the bureaucracy?
Our students need a new approach to education. Carpe Diem has that new approach. As you enter Carpe Diem, one of the first things you'll notice is that it doesn't look like other schools.
It's completely different than a normal school.
I would have to say it's very advanced.
The Carpe Diem was very different, but in a good way.
Carpe Diem Collegiate High School is a blended learning school that blends the best of face-to-face instruction, technology, and extended learning opportunities in order to boost student achievement.
So if you ask me, like, how many schools are actually doing this, I think I showed you at least 50% of the schools that are doing it around the country. So it's a very new area. And I think this fall we'll see about 20 schools actually trying to implement models like this across the country. So a little discussion about what blended learning is and how we're looking at it. So this is a picture of a KIPP school in Los Angeles, and essentially what they're doing is small group instruction. There's guided instruction and independent practice going on in the background, right? This concept is not new, and we know that it's pretty effective. So essentially what we're doing in a blended learning model, and this is an example, a schematic of what one of the high schools we're working in looks like. They went from a class size of 30 kids with a teacher lecturing to a class size of 48 students with groups of 16. So effectively, the teacher is working with a group of 16, and the students rotate every 30 minutes. One of the stations is a project-based activity or group learning or some sort of guided practice. Another station is computer-based instruction for basic skills, practice, and what we call acceleration. Conceptually, the way we see it, and I'll give you a short example. When I was in Pennsylvania talking with the Deputy Secretary of Education, she was explaining to me she was working with a first grade English language arts teacher and explaining the concept of using reading mastery to help accelerate students through the reading class. And the teacher said, well, that's great, but what do I do the second part of the year? Even if I do my whole curriculum the first part of the year, I won't have anything to do. And she said, well, maybe you could do practice and things like that, or take them to second grade reading levels. And she said, well, what's the second grade teacher going to do? So the concept of kind of accelerating the learning velocity of a student is enabled by the use of computers. And to give you an example of this, at the KIPP school, we actually combined 3 courses. For kindergarten, we combined a kindergarten, first grade, and second grade math course. And I would say a vast majority of the students actually completed that whole sequence in 1 year. And so you hear about the students that are using Khan Academy and a fifth grader doing calculus. That's great stuff. What we are concerned about and why we think blended learning is important is because the teacher can focus on depth of learning, right? You're learning skills online, and most content providers really focus and move students forward based on proficiency, but they don't focus a lot on depth. And so we think that the group rotation is really a good mix between acceleration and depth. So I'm going to walk you through a little more detail about the KIPP school we piloted last year. It's an elementary school in Watts. The kids came in kindergarten without letter recognition. So one of the challenges we were dealing with in a computer-based environment is how does a kid log in, right? So we eliminated all those features of students could just do mouse clicks. We also realized that a lot of the kids didn't have motor skills, so they couldn't double click, they couldn't drag and drop. So we taught them all those things. Within a week, they were able to get into the system, go on to the courses. And the most amazing thing was you could see real mastery happening even on the computers because kids were helping each other and explaining how to their neighbor how to progress through the lessons. And if the kid could explain that to the other kid right next to him, you could see that real learning was taking place. The issue that KIPP was facing was most of their elementary schools have class size of about 20. And because of the class size cost reductions or funding reductions, they increased their class size to about 30 kids for kindergarten, which is a pretty big number. So what they did was they broke out the school into two groups initially, the classes of two groups of 15, and then eventually they even enhanced it a little bit more and got into 4 groups of 7 and 8. So schematically, this is what they do for core instruction, right? Math, there's 2 groups that rotate. Reading, there's actually 3 groups. There's guided reading, instruction from the teacher, and also an online interface. Writing and science, there's a computer component. And then the juicy stuff, the results, right? First year results, we compared this school to another KIPP elementary school that in mid-year they had 10 times the number of advanced students as the regular school. We also saw that 96% of the students are in proficient or advanced, so the trajectory of their learning was pretty quick and fast, coming from 8% or 9% proficient. So 96, 98% was basic or below basic. So I think this is the most interesting analysis, and what this shows is the year-end reading results of a kid. And if you look at the number 3 on the bottom, those are the number of students at year-end kindergarten proficiency. And then number 6 are the percentage of students that are at year-end first grade proficiency. And the number 9 is the percentage of students that are at year-end second grade proficiency. So these are kindergartners that are reading at well into first grade and second grade levels. So pretty amazing results so far. In addition to that, the school is saving about $1,000 per kid from their original model. And then finally about KIPP, we also surveyed the teachers, right? And very surprised by the results we got from the teachers. Surveyed all the teachers across the country, and this school came in number 2 in terms of teacher satisfaction. And if you ask them why they came in number 2, the teachers are highly satisfied because 1, they found it easier to plan. Even though you're planning for multiple groups, if you know what to plan for, it's a lot easier, right? Versus like trying to figure out a lesson plan for 30 kids, trying to differentiate top and bottom, spending all night trying to figure out, looking through the data and all that stuff. So the computer programs actually provided that data for the teachers, the real-time basis on a daily basis, so that they could have the information they need to figure out what resources they needed. Secondly, the teachers actually found it much more engaging to teach in small group than in large classrooms, right? Because you get instant feedback from the students. And so that was part of the reason why the results were so good with the teachers. So one of the things that we often do, and I think the first gentleman that spoke talked a little bit about this concept of finding content and resources and content curation. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about this. One of the challenges that we find that schools have is, how do you make decisions about content when there's 100 different content providers out there at different grade levels with different taxonomies, pedagogical approaches and such? And quite frankly, there isn't a holy grail or like the silver bullet for content right now. And so what we are suggesting is there's a methodology and a process to making decisions around content that might be most appropriate for your school. And it's not about just looking at the content, it's about looking at whether an activity is aligned to standards, whether the questions are aligned, whether it's adaptive or not adaptive, whether there's multiple grade levels. So like I mentioned about the KIP, if you're looking at implementing something for 3rd grade, you might need 4th, 5th, 6th grade content because those kids are going to get that far. So as you make these decisions, you want to have those kinds of filters in place to make sure that you're making the right one. And then second to lastly, I wanted to talk about adaptive because it's kind of like the buzzword of the day, and there's a lot of different definitions. And so there's 5 categories of adaptive that I've created. One is one-time adaptive, and one-time adaptive means they take a formative assessment. The formative assessment data goes into the content system. It auto-creates a personalized course for the student, but it's done one time based on proficiency levels, and then the students go through those courses. They're scaffolded, so some providers provide you a student with an activity, and then if you don't show proficiency on it, they may scaffold it with additional hints or tips, and we saw a short example of that in some of the slides before. Or they may provide it to you in audio and read it to you so that it provides the student with additional adaptive scaffolding. There's node-based. So node-based is products like Dreambox, which are adaptive but kind of linear in terms of moving a student from one node to the next node based on their proficiency level, and each node may have a set of proficiencies. There's modality-based. So modality-based, an example of this would be a solution called School of One, and what they did was they put some logic into the system. They got multiple content providers that had learning objects that were aligned to standards. So for a particular standard, they may be able to deliver that in multiple modalities of video, flash-based activity, drills, text, and they try to make assumptions around how students learn best based on some of the data that they collect. Definite challenges around doing that because tagging all of the learning objects and putting it into a repository and collecting all this information isn't completely honed. And then finally, I think kind of the machine learning that was talked about in the initial session is the intelligence systems, where you talk about artificial intelligences and being able to adapt to different levels of intelligences from visual to audio to verbal, as well as being able to deliver content based on students' learning styles. And you need a lot of aggregation of data and analytics around that, but also you need content that's chunked into those smaller increments so that it can be broken out. Right now, most of the publishers out there don't do that because chunking it and getting rid of all of the referential information between chapters is very difficult. And lastly, what some people are saying, right? And so we asked a kid, in a school that had class sizes of 45 to 1, they're saying, it's the smallest class I've ever seen. And the reason they're saying that is because their interaction with the teacher is in small group, right? They're interacting with the teacher where they think that schooling is, 7 or 8 students. Envision Academy tried Khan Academy, and they thought that there would be a lot of management issues with students on the computers on their own. They're claiming that there were 0 management issues, right? And then finally, John Danner at Rocketship, he talks about the use of content, and there's an inappropriate use, which is a glorified babysitter, right? You throw the kids on the computers, hope they do something, doesn't really inform instruction, And so he's really moving the needle in terms of how to collect that data, use that data for teachers to help inform the teachers around what happens in the classroom. Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Anthony for putting some definitions and some data behind this buzz term blended learning that has been floating around, but I haven't really figured out what it is. I'm sure this audience will have a lot of questions and discussion about what we just saw. There's been a lot of requests for slides, and I think especially some of the scaffolding work. So we are going to put up all the slides from all the speakers who give us their slides to put up, and we will put that on your GFI website that you all have bookmarked, I'm sure. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Larry Rosenstock. How many of you have visited High Tech High School? Oh, you should all go. I'm inviting them all to your school. Is that okay? So the first time I went to High Tech High, I walked in the door and I was like, where are all the computers? And so Larry will talk a little bit about that, I'm sure. And it's just such an interactive school, right? Things are moving around. It reminded me really of mechanical engineering schools that you go into where there's a lot of things to play with. And so, Larry, it's on. Yeah.
I'll use this one.
You can use either. He turns on.
Oh, he turns mine. Okay, good. Gotcha. We do have computers. We don't have computer labs. One of my favorite quotes was a visitor said to a kid who was giving him a tour guide, "Where are the computer labs?" And he said, "Did they used to have pencil labs?" Like, oh, that's the room you go when you want to write. Yeah. So we have laptops all over the place. Another interesting quote was that someone told me that from Virginia, that when he visited in May, a sophomore was taking them around and they said, "Do you have homework?" And she said, "No." And they said, "What do you do at night?" "Should I finish my projects?" So High Tech High, very quickly, is a cluster of public charter schools in Southern California. We have we have 11 schools. We have about 5,000 students. We started in the year 2000. Our kids are selected purely by blind zip code-based lottery coming from Brown versus Board of Education guy. So basically, one of the problems that we have is apartheid schooling in America, and it's gotten worse. And there's a lot of foundations that say we'll give you more money if you're 99% poverty, which I think is not healthy. And the narrative for social class integration has vanished from the national landscape, I think, to our detriment, but not for us. So what we do is there's 109 zip codes in the metropolitan area. We've got a very clever algorithm. We see what % of kids reside in every zip code. There's no, when you apply online, or you can do it in paper, there is no transcript, there's no letter of recommendation, there is absolutely no proxy for achievement whatsoever. It's purely, the computer just takes whatever % of kids are the % that reside in that zip code. The data that we do care about, I just want to say this at the outset, is something that my dear friend of mine, Ted Sizer, who I had the pleasure of working with for many years, who passed away recently, worked on quite a bit back in Cambridge, which is ABC. We think this is the data for any CMO, any school, any public school, any state, and the whole country. A, of your entities entering 9th graders, what % graduated from a 4-year college? B, of your entities entering 9th graders in poverty, what % graduated from a 4-year college? C, what % of A was B? For us, A is 86%, B is 74%, and C is 40%, because 40% of California is free and reduced lunch, and that's what we try to track to. So that's basically a little bit of who we are. We are about production, not consumption. So the name High Tech High is kind of a misnomer, because sometimes people come and think it's ITT Tech. It is not. It's really about kids producing and making very, very cool things. And so I got from Nina some really cool quotes that came from here yesterday, and I've got one that came from 1916 by John Dewey, whose shoulders we stand on. "There's no such thing as genuine knowledge and fruitful understanding except as the offspring of doing. People have to do something to the things they wish to find out about. They have to alter conditions. This is the lesson of the laboratory method, and this is the lesson which all education has to learn." Very much the case right now. So when you think about altering conditions and production, I'm going to start at the end. Here's an interesting thing to do. We had 2 teachers. One of them is a Scottish fellow who has a PhD in astrophysics from Oxford. Another is a brilliant nutcase art teacher who would not mind if I told you the day he came in my office and said, "I don't think it's right that my shrink gives me the same meds he's on at the same time, do you?" At any rate, So he only calls me 12 times a day. He's already called me 4. He calls me 12 times a day, and I'll be in a cab back to the airport. I'll say, "What's up?" He'll say, "Nothing." What the kids did with him and these 2 teachers, these are seniors, last year, was they took the California state standards. Don't open it up right. Well, you could. Don't open it up right now, Jamie, okay, because I'm gonna just move really quickly because I don't have that much time. The kids illustrated the Newtonian state standards in physics for 9th graders. 9th graders, why is it that the United States teaches science in alphabetical order? Well, that happened from the Committee of 10 in 1893. If you want to know why we have a problem, maybe the problem is that 10% of American high school kids take physics. So what High Tech High and the West of the Western world do is we teach conceptual physics in the 9th, chemistry in the 10th, biology in the 11th, and applied mathematical physics in the 12th, okay? So, oh, hi, how you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. So that's that one. That's kind of an interesting one. We have kids, one of my advisees, every one of us had 15 advisees. Is an advisee of mine who, really wonderful guy who, like Eric Carle, for those of you who know kids' books, he made a book that explains black holes for young kids, for middle school kids and elementary school kids. And he really explains it really quite well. And it's really easy to publish and to produce, especially now with Lulu and sites like that, where all you do for no cost whatsoever is you just send the PDFs, and then people can just go on and buy them if they want to. And also Blurb is another one. Then we had another faculty member who PhD from Stanford in biotechnology, and we did an exercise when we first opened, which is something called the Hobbies and Avocations exercise. It's a great exercise to do with faculty. What are the things that you love to do outside of school when you're not teaching? And the answer was he was a photographer because his uncle was a photographer for National Geographic, and his uncle basically dragged him around the world some summers taking photographs of flora and fauna. So we said, bring it in, bring it in, bring it in. So he's now published 4 books. He's just coming back from Africa with a group of kids right now, actually working on AIDS-related stuff with bushmeat. But this is the first book they did, which is Perspectives of San Diego Bay, totally done by kids, which is a book that looks at all the flora and fauna of San Diego Bay. And one of my favorite features of it, and this is the brilliance of when production is done by adolescents, is that in the mammal section, there's a very respectful treatment of homeless people who live by the bay. Now, we as adults would have seen homeless people, but it takes an adolescent to say, wait a second, we're doing something on the flora and fauna of the bay, and homeless people, they live here. So that's the first book. And Jane Goodall heard about us and said, can I write the intro? And we said yes. Then they did another book on exploitation. And then they did a 3rd book, and then E.O. Wilson, the entomologist, if you know him at Harvard, who we're now getting to work very closely with. So now every year, the juniors do a different book, big book, about San Diego Bay. That's yet another one. Then we have a young former TFA'er. We hire a lot. We hire about 40, 50 teachers out of about 1,500 applicants every year. Really sad about the very high unemployment rate of recent college grads in this country, which is a problem for all of us and will be for at least a decade. And we love the people that get through the eye of our needle, and the people who get through the eye of TFA's needle happen to be very much like the one that gets through the eye of ours. So this young guy, with his students, actually, I think it's because his fiancée is getting her PhD in microeconomics at UCSD. So I think that had something to do with it, which is good. He's a humanities teacher. And so what the kids did was they each took a different part of microeconomics, terms that we've all heard, terms that we might not know what they mean, and every kid did something with every one of them. The terms, these are the chapters: incentives, moral hazard, rationality, opportunity cost, externalities, free riding, utility, warm glow preferences, diminishing margining, utility, elasticity. All these things we've heard, but we're not quite sure what they are. So every kid had to do a few things. They had to make a wood block that captured what it was, because we integrate art with much of what we do. They had to write a description of what it was in their own terms, their own words, and then they had to come up with 3 examples from everyday life that expressed what one of those things might be. So one of them was like for moral hazard was if you go skiing without a helmet on. Yes, so sort of a moral hazard. Would you take greater risk or something like that? So, and I gave this to a CEO in town, who's an interesting fellow. One day when I met with him, of a major company, and 3 days later he emailed me and said, I was just talking to Bill Clinton last night, who said he's really gotten into microeconomics, and I said, I just read a book which helped me understand it better than anything I've ever read before. Who wrote it? Bill said. And he said, so some 10th graders at this school called High Tech High. So the guy said, will you please send me a copy? So I sent him 5 with a little post-it that said, in case you know any former presidents that want to brush up on microeconomics. And then we have Unboxed, which is our appropriately named Ed Review, because we do have a graduate school of education that is firmly embedded within K-12 schools. And so, and at the end of Unboxed, which is all of this is online, are all these different sort of cards or project cards that people do. Okay, so that's a little bit of the flavor of what we do. I want to say a few things, especially being at a place like Google that I've been thinking about a lot. The engineers that I have known and the artists that I have known and the entrepreneurs that I have known have something in common, and it's about curiosity, but it's more about perplexity. It's more about the fact that if you know them, they are nutcases who have to do. They gotta do what they gotta do. That's exactly what we want our kids to be like. So we want to seek perplexity, and if we have perplexity, then what happens next is that leads to engagement, which basically leads to learning. And I call that sort of paradox therapy. What's an example of paradox therapy? Okay. A teacher comes in my room one day and says, go on eBay right now. I got to buy a cigarette machine from Tennessee. It's closing in 2 minutes. I said, what? What do you want that for? He said, shh. So, okay, so we bought it, okay? You know, for $200, you know, mid-century cigarette machine. I don't know what it's for, but, you know, you got to trust people. So then I see 2 months later, in the main hallway of our school, there's a cigarette machine. Now, first of all, nobody sees cigarette machines like that any place. But what the kids did, engineering teacher and art teacher, was they took balsa wood blocks, the size and weight of cigarette packs. The kids made paintings on them, really nice paintings. They loaded the machine up with the paintings. They retooled the machine so that it would be a different amount of money, so they had to take the whole thing apart and redo it. They took out the thing that said cigarettes and put in the thing that says, buy a piece of High Tech High student art. So when you come in the front door of our first school, people go, what's the cigarette machine doing here? You know? So that's the paradoxical part. And then they go, oh, that's really cool. That's the therapeutic part. Paradox therapy, okay? We like to do a lot of that, get people kind of scratching their heads a little bit. So a project, we don't do all projects. I'm a storyteller. I'm doing storytelling right now. We have lectures for 5 minutes. Okay, so let me show you this. So we have, but projects are about observation, reflection, documentation, and exhibition. Would you just go down, scroll on down. This is jeffrobin.com. Why he made his own website, because it annoys him that it takes so many clicks to get to his work on ours. Okay, so Calculicious, don't open it, but Calculicious, very, very interesting integration of art and calculus. We're finding that art integrates with math better than most other subjects, for what it's worth. Okay, and keep analog flash for Windows. Open it up, please, Jamie. Bingo. 3 guys, the art teacher in the middle, the physicist and the engineering teacher, these 3 characters, and they go to the exploratorium. They're going to do something with the kids. They look at how things work, the great book. They actually study with the kids how to curate. We do that with our kids quite a bit. Keep on going down, go down, 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 down. Then they see all these prototypes in the interest of time, because I got my 5-minute warning. Keep on going down, and okay, and then here, stop there. Okay, so now, well, don't open the assignment. Go down a little bit more. Go down a little bit more. And let's do more. Okay, so now here we have 25 things that are exhibited. Go down one more notch, because right there. Okay, good. Okay, so we have 25 things that are exhibited. We have these fire-rated windows that are 2 feet by 2 feet. So what they did was they installed 25 of these, and there's 2 seniors on each project. Okay, and they had to be, it's called analog flash for Windows. Play on the word analog, play on the word flash, play on the word window. So it had to be interactive. That's what they got from the Exploratorium. So if you look at, you open up that one right there, that's the chaotic pendulum. Tyrone Lee, who actually is now at Reed College, I realized one day he walks like a chaotic pendulum. That's why he made that, I think. And so and I see it's because right near the conference room where I work a lot, and people come and interact with these things all of the time, okay? So basically, the way that you pass the physics final would be that if Judith, my friend, and I made the chaotic pendulum, the only way that we could pass the physics final is if we set up a meeting with the other 24 teams and learn the physics from their project. The physics final included all of the physics from all 25 projects, and the efficacy of the peer-to-peer exchange and the study group are very, very powerful. And then go back quickly, Jamie, and then roll down and just open the test. I just want to open the test. So I just want to, that's the assignment, the test link. Very good. It's really a physics test. And you can scroll on down. It's just like real. It's not like, I don't want people to think that it's not really rigorous stuff. It is a fallacy to think that this is not rigorous stuff. Okay, so I have probably about 3 minutes to go. So let me say, I want to show you something, and I just want to show you something that a boy just made. And I don't want to speak about how horrible his life has been. I've already said enough about it. It has been. And we've all had people who are very quiet and in the corner, and then all of a sudden they write this paper when you're an educator, and you go, whoa, where were they, right? So this is something that this boy made out of wherever, and he is, well, I'll tell you after you see it. It's 2 minutes long. Let's just take a peek at it, then we'll wrap up, and I'll tell you where he's going to college next year, okay? Production, not consumption, and not just the adults doing the explaining and the students doing the listening. We want the students doing the explaining and we as the adults doing the listening. Calvin Brown is entering UCSD in linguistics in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everybody.